The doorbell rang, sharp and insistent, cutting through the hum of cicadas outside my small Ohio home. I froze, my heart slamming against my ribs as if it knew something I didn't. It was him, Pastor James, the man who'd been my anchor through grief, now standing on my porch with a Bible and a look that could unravel souls. I was 24, still raw from losing my mom 6 months ago, and James had been there every Sunday sermon, every late-night call when I couldn't sleep. His voice, warm and steady, had pulled me through the dark. But tonight, something felt different. The air was thick, like the world was holding its breath, waiting for a crack to split it open. I opened the door, and there he was, tall, broad-shouldered, his dark eyes catching the porch light like they held secrets too heavy to carry. "Evan," he said, my name soft on his lips. "I came to pray with you." But the way his gaze lingered, the way his hand brushed mine as he stepped inside, it wasn't just prayer he brought. We sat in my living room, the same one where Mom used to hum old hymns while cooking. James opened his Bible, his fingers trembling slightly as he read Psalm 23. I tried to focus, but my eyes kept drifting to him, the faint stubble on his jaw, the way his collar seemed too tight, like it was choking something unspoken. He was 38, married, a father of 2, the kind of man everyone in our small town of Willow Creek admired. Untouchable, holy. Yet here he was, in my house, his knee inches from mine, and I could feel the heat of him like a fever. "Evan," he said again, closing the Bible, his voice lower now, almost a whisper. "I've been thinking about you. More than I should." My breath caught, and the room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as his words hung between us. I wanted to laugh it off, to pretend I didn't feel the same pull. But my body betrayed me. My hands shook. My pulse raced. I'd known I was gay since I was 16, but I'd buried it deep, locked it away in a town where being different was a sin you didn't confess. James leaned closer, his eyes searching mine, and I saw a flicker of fear. Of what? Of something he'd been fighting for years. "I've prayed to be free of this," he admitted, his voice breaking. "But every time I see you, it's like God's testing me, and I'm failing." My heart pounded so loud I thought he'd hear it. I wanted to tell him to leave, to save us both from whatever this was. But instead, I reached out, my fingers grazing his. That touch, it was a spark in a dry field, and we both felt the burn. He didn't pull away. Instead, his hand closed over mine, strong and certain. And for a moment, the world was just us 2 men caught in a truth neither of us could name. Then his phone buzzed, shattering the silence. His wife's name lit up the screen, and he flinched like he'd been slapped. "I shouldn't be here," he said, standing abruptly, his face pale. But as he moved toward the door, he stopped, turning back to me. "Evan, I don't know what this means, but I can't stop it." He left without another word, the door clicking shut behind him, leaving me trembling on the couch, my mind spinning with what had just happened and what might come next. The next morning, I woke to a text from him, "Meet me at the church tonight, please." My stomach twisted. Willow Creek's church was the heart of our town, a place where people like me learned to hide. Going there felt like walking into a lion's den. But the thought of seeing him again, a feeling that spark, pulled me like a tide. I spent the day pacing, replaying his words, his touch, wondering if I was crazy to hope for something that could destroy us both. That evening, The church loomed dark and quiet, its steeple cutting into the starry sky. I slipped inside, my sneakers soft on the hardwood floor. James was waiting in the back pew, his head bowed like he was praying or begging for forgiveness. When he saw me, he stood, his face a storm of emotions. "I couldn't sleep," he said. "All I could think about was you." We didn't touch. Not yet. But the space between us crackled with something alive. Something dangerous. He told me about his life, how he'd known he was different since he was a teenager. How he'd married Sarah to prove he could be normal. How every sermon he preached felt like a lie. I listened, my heart aching for him. For us. For the weight of a world that demanded we stay silent. "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice raw. "But I know I feel alive when I'm with you." I wanted to tell him I felt the same. That I'd spent years dreaming of someone who saw me. Really saw me. But before I could speak, headlights swept through the church windows. Someone was outside. Panic seized us both. James grabbed my arm, pulling me into the shadows of the choir loft. We crouched there, hearts pounding, as footsteps echoed in the sanctuary. It was Sarah, his wife, calling his name. "James, are you here?" Her voice was sharp, suspicious, like she knew something was wrong. I held my breath, my body pressed against his. And for a moment, fear and desire tangled so tightly I couldn't tell them apart. She left after what felt like an eternity. But the air between us had changed. James looked at me, his eyes wide with guilt and longing. "We can't do this," he whispered. But his hand was still on my arm, his thumb brushing my skin like he couldn't let go. I wanted to argue, to beg him to stay. But I knew he was right. This wasn't just about use, it was about his family, his church, the life he'd built on a foundation of lies. As he slipped out into the night, I stayed in the loft, my chest tight with a mix of hope and dread. I didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but I knew one thing. James had cracked open a door in my heart, and there was no closing it now. The days after that night in the church were a blur of longing and fear. I couldn't stop thinking about James's voice, his touch, the way his eyes held mine like I was the only thing keeping him tethered to the earth. But every time my phone buzzed, I braced myself, half expecting a message from Sarah or a church elder, someone who'd seen us, who knew. James didn't text for 3 days. I went to Sunday service out of habit, sitting in the back, my heart racing every time he stepped to the pulpit. He preached about forgiveness, his voice steady but his eyes avoiding mine. I wondered if he regretted it, if he'd decided to bury whatever this was. But after the service, as the congregation spilled out into the parking lot, he brushed past me, slipping a note into my hand, "Meet me at the lake. Midnight." Willow Creek Lake was a quiet spot, hidden by pines, where kids swam in summer and couples stole kisses under the stars. I got there early, the moonlight glinting off the water, my nerves frayed. When James arrived, he looked different, no collar, just a worn jacket and jeans, like he was shedding the skin of Pastor James. I told Sarah I needed to clear my head, he said, his voice low. "But all I wanted was to see you." We walked along the shore, the gravel crunching under our feet. And for the first time, we talked like we weren't hiding. He told me about his childhood, how he'd grown up in a strict Baptist family, how he'd prayed every night to be fixed. I shared my own story coming out to my mom at 18, her quiet acceptance, the way she'd held me and said, God doesn't make mistakes. That memory stung, but it also gave me courage. I reached for his hand, and this time, he didn't pull away. Under the shadow of a willow tree, he kissed me. It was tentative at first, like he was testing the waters of a forbidden sea. But then it deepened, and I felt the world shift. His hands cupped my face, his breath warm against my skin. And for those few seconds, nothing else existed. No church, no town, no guilt. Just us. But the moment shattered when a car's headlights cut through the darkness. We pulled apart, hearts racing, and ducked behind the tree. It was just a teenager's truck, probably kids sneaking out. But it was a reminder of how fragile this was. We're playing with fire, James said, his voice shaking. If anyone finds out, it's not just my kids, my life. I wanted to tell him we could make it work, that we could run away, start over somewhere no one knew us. But I saw the pain in his eyes, the weight of his responsibilities, and I knew it wasn't that simple. What do we do? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He didn't answer, just pulled me close, his forehead against mine. And we stood there, holding onto each other like we could stop time. The next week was torture. We stole moments, a brush of hands in the church hallway, a glance across the coffee shop, but every touch felt like a risk. I started noticing things, Sarah watching James a little too closely. The way the church elders whispered when I walked by. Willow Creek was small, and secrets didn't stay buried long. One night, James called me, his voice tight. Sarah found the note. He said, she thinks I'm having an affair. Not with you, she doesn't know that, but she's asking questions. My stomach dropped. I pictured her, blonde and soft-spoken, the perfect pastor's wife, piecing together a truth that could ruin us all. What did you tell her? I asked. I lied, he said, and I could hear the shame in his voice. I said it was nothing, just a counseling session. But Evan, I can't keep doing this. I'm tearing my family apart. I wanted to scream that he wasn't the only one breaking, that I was falling for him, that every moment without him felt like drowning. But I couldn't say it. Instead, I whispered, come over. Just one more time. He showed up at my house an hour later, his eyes red, his hands shaking. We didn't pray this time. We didn't even speak. He kissed me like it was the last time. And maybe it was. We fell onto the couch, a tangle of desperation and need. And for a few hours, the world was ours. But as dawn broke, reality crept back in. I have to choose, he said, sitting up, his voice hollow. My family or this. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to choose you. I felt like I'd been punched. I wanted to beg him to stay, to fight for us. But I saw the torment in his eyes. He was a man torn between love and duty. And I couldn't make that choice for him. Whatever you decide, I said, my voice breaking. I'll always be here. He left before the sun rose, and I sat alone, staring at the empty couch, wondering if I'd just lost the only person who'd ever made me feel whole. The weeks that followed were a slow bleed. James stopped texting, stopped meeting my eyes at church. I heard rumors, whispers that he was taking a leave of absence, that Sarah was asking for a separation. Willow Creek buzzed with gossip, and I felt like a ghost, drifting through a town that didn't know my secret but sensed it anyway. I threw myself into work, fixing cars at the local garage, trying to drown out the ache. But every night, I'd lie awake, replaying our moments, the lake, the church, my couch, wondering if I'd dreamed it all. I wanted to hate him for pulling away, but I couldn't. I loved him too much, and that love was a weight I carried alone. One rainy afternoon, I found a letter slipped under my door. No name, just my address in James's neat handwriting. My hands shook as I opened it. Evan, I'm sorry. I've been a coward. Meet me at the lake tonight. I need to tell you something. I didn't know if it was a goodbye or a beginning, but I went. The lake was shrouded in mist, the air heavy with the scent of rain-soaked pine. James was there, sitting on a bench, his face drawn. When he saw me, he stood, and for a moment, we just stared, the distance between us feeling like miles. I told Sarah, he said, his voice steady but raw. Not everything, but enough. I told her I've been lying to myself, to her, for years. She's angry, hurt, but she deserves the truth. My heart raced. What does that mean for us? I asked, afraid of the answer. He stepped closer, his hand reaching for mine. It means I'm done hiding. I don't know what happens next divorce, leaving the church, starting over, but I know I can't live without you. I wanted to believe him, but fear clawed at me. What about your kids? The town? They'll tear you apart. They might, he admitted, his eyes fierce. But I've spent my life preaching about love, and I've never lived it. Not until you. He kissed me then, right there in the open, rain soaking through our clothes. It wasn't just a kiss, it was a promise, a defiance, a step into a world that wouldn't welcome us but couldn't stop us either. For the first time, I felt free, like I could breathe without the weight of secrets crushing me. The fallout came fast. Sarah moved out with the kids, and James stepped down from the church. The town turned on him, whispers turning to shouts, but he faced it all with a quiet strength I hadn't seen before. I stood by him, holding his hand through the glares and the gossip, knowing we were building something real, something worth fighting for. We moved to a small apartment in Columbus, far enough from Willow Creek to start fresh, but close enough to visit his kids. It wasn't easy. There were nights we fought, nights we doubted, nights we wondered if love was enough. But every morning, I'd wake up next to him, his arm around me, and I'd know it was. One evening, as we sat on our tiny balcony, watching the city lights, James turned to me. I used to think God was punishing me for feeling this way, he said. But now I think he brought me to you to show me what love really is. I smiled, my heart full. Maybe he did. Our story wasn't perfect. It was messy, painful, built on broken promises and hard truths. But it was ours. And as we sat there, hand in hand, I realized that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is choose love even when it shakes your world to its core.